I'm Bailey Parnell, and this is Let's Think This Through. Join me for drinks as I bring on guests for conversations that inspire, amuse, and challenge us, but in a fun and relaxing kind of way. Ultimately, it's to help us all learn and live a better, easier life. So let's think this through. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Let's Think This Through with me, Bailey Parnell. I'm going to ask you a question. What does it mean to be rich? What does it really mean to be rich? How you answer that question probably comes as a result of things that you don't even realize. The media you grew up with, the country you grew up in, perhaps a faith that you subscribe to, perhaps powers that be that existed in your country long before you were even born. What are the other things that your brain tells yourself about you? Perhaps that they're not good, perhaps that you don't belong, perhaps you're speaking up too much. All of these things, these stories that probably are not your brain talking to yourself. All of this stuff interests me wildly, and with my guest on this episode, this is the stuff that we kind of talk about every time that we get together. Where do our narratives come from? I'm excited for you to listen to this episode with this guest because she's one of the most insightful people probably that I know, and what we always laugh about how there's really no title for her. She is everything. She is a coach to some, a teacher, an educator to some, but really a wise guide to others. I mean, really, like we're saying, there's titles beyond titles here. So what's really important here is what is the message and the experiences that she can leave you with. And I'm really excited for you to hear that in just 1 hour. So today on Let's Think This Through, I will be having drinks with my friend, Karlyn Percil. Welcome.
Thank you.
I'm glad to be reconnecting. It's been a while, and I basically just use this podcast to hang out with people that I want to hang out with and haven't in a while.
And honestly, I think it's the best way to catch up, because what I also love about your podcast, it's like a conversation. It is a catch up, and we'll talk about all the things life and not just this squished up version of a role based version of who we are.
Yeah, and you know what I like to do too is even with friends or people that I've known before in different contexts, if you think about it, like a lot of the time you are meeting up together because we were in some context of, I don't know, some conference, some women's event, and then you might get like an hour at this event, but when I'm on my podcast, I can just ask all the questions I want in all the various aspects of life.
Which I love,
Yeah.
right? Our roles, your roles, our roles.
Yeah, exactly. So how are you introducing yourself to the people these days? Give us that nice pitch of what you're up to.
Introducing myself. I guess you can say cultural innovator, social impact, global social impact innovator, cultural equity educator. I mean, I have different names or roles that I play with that captures the season and the essence of who I am becoming. Um, it also is, just Karlyn. And if I had to use one word to introduce myself, I'd say like Karlyn. Also, love. That's it.
Yeah, right.
Love in a body, in a human body.
Yeah, I feel like you can just end the podcast there because it's like, all right, y'all already got the main message of every episode, which is just, just love, okay? Love in a body, that's all you got to go do. Okay. But no, honestly, it's funny that you describe yourself that way, but maybe I'll have to tell them a little bit more about how you are everything, which is why choosing titles can be so challenging. I think you're definitely an educator at heart. You're definitely a coach. You're a mentor. You're a teacher. That's all these things, right? And
Yeah.
entrepreneur, a host. But that's what it is really when you have this mission that you mentioned of cultural equity and empowering people. It can come out and be expressed in many ways.
Exactly, exactly. And when you think about the purpose of us being in this human body is about expressing ourselves or remembering who we are, then you will find different parts of your story in different creative expressions of self. And I think that's what keeps curiosity and imagination alive, which I think is the most powerful tools that we can tap into as human beings.
This is gonna be fun. What are you drinking today?
Oh, today, this morning, hubby got up and got me I'm having this mocha from this local coffee shop because, we have to support our small local coffee shops.
Yeah.
So, and it's so delicious.
Oh,
What
that's
about, what about
amazing.
you? What are you drinking?
Honestly, today I've got a lot. I have some chai as well in my uh, Air and Space Museum mug. I also
Oh,
have
I love
iced
that.
coffee because I was on that first. And
So
so
you like
I
me.
have water here today.
I have I have my water. I have my
Exactly.
yes.
We're just some hydrated girlies.
Yes, we are.
I
And
just drop some
And
actually.
also, we are girlies who might, I might need a sip of water. Then it's like, coffee, tea. Then
Yeah.
it's all of the above.
Yeah, so when I was doing some research about you, knowing that we were going to have this chat today, I went on your website, which looked like it was redesigned. It looked very nice. And
Oh, thank
I was like,
you.
came across, I know that you're from St. Lucia, but I realized that it seems like you've really strengthened your connection with back home. And so I had to ask, like, you are proudly from St. Lucia, but what was it like to grow up there?
Proudly Lucian, damn proud Lucian. And as a way of introducing Saint Lucia to you, I'm gonna start bring greetings from our ancestral lands and say Sakafet. So
Mhm.
Sakafet means how are you? And it's a French Creole. It's a fusion of our indigenous people, the Tainos, um, the Caribs, the Arawaks, as well as the were colonized by the French.
Mhm.
So we have that French infusion as well. But our ancestors came up with their own language. So Sakafet. So I'm gonna get you to practice with me because I hope you know you're coming to St. Lucia at some point.
Yeah, Sakafet.
Hey, there you go. See,
Yeah.
you got it. You got it. But what is it like growing up there? Honestly, I feel so grateful and so privileged to have been chosen to be born in St. Lucia. And the reason why I say that is that St. Lucia is the only island in the Caribbean who was named after a woman. She was named after Santa St. Lucia. And it's one of the most lush, beautiful, we're only 180,000 people, 237 square miles. And to be able to be born, and I was born in the part of St. Lucia, we call it the countryside, meaning I was born literally in the bush. It's like, and actually, recently I was visualizing it and I was like, think of like all of this around us. It's like just forest, it's bush. And this is the house that I was born in, like smack in the middle.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
I grew up, going to bathe in the river, carrying my water in jerrycans. So I feel very privileged that I had a chance to be one with nature for the first 17 years of my life.
Mm.
If I had to listen to colonial narratives around my upbringing, people would say that we're poor, but actually we're quite rich. I did my homework by
Mm.
candlelight. Again, at nights I fell asleep to the birds and the we call it betafe, like all the
Mm.
different night animals, the fireflies, just whispering and chirping in my ear. So I just feel so lucky to have been born in such a beautiful space, beautiful people, lush vegetation, but most importantly, the legacy that we are continuing to carry as St. Lucians, the land, the light, and the people, is one that I'm so actively proud to contribute to. So going back to your point around seeing the redesign because when I moved to Canada to Takaranto, that's when I learned I was Black. Because growing up in the
Mm.
Caribbean, you have your national identity, right? You're St. Lucian, you speak, and even
Right.
in St. Lucia as well, there was this colonial narrative around if you spoke French Creole, sous parler patois, then you're poor. Again, they're like, oh, well, it's a derogatory language.
Mm.
Multilinguistic as a practice wasn't always celebrated.
Mhm.
So you enter this crisis of cultural identity where you're speaking the language that your parents spoke to you that you inherited from your ancestors. It feels right
Mhm.
somatically in your body, but then the world is telling you that it's not. And even within the country itself, there's still that division. If you're from the northern part of the island, there are some folks who don't speak the language. We don't celebrate it. And those who are from South, which is where I'm from, we celebrate it and we speak it and we're so proud of it. And as much as I think like we're losing some of it, I'm very, very proud and excited. We have some projects that are going on right now. We're launching a visual blog soon called Cultural Communion, which celebrates our cultural identity, our food, our people, and but also bringing forth cultural narratives on different topics, including AI. And the people who are preserving the culture, I'm just so proud and again so inspired by their efforts, but also by the time, the love, and their contributions in terms of keeping the culture alive in all forms.
That's you said so many things there that could be threads worth pulling on, and one of the things that stands out to me that I really think you should think like explain to people so that they can think through is that other people said that you were poor, but you felt very rich. So what about your upbringing from your mind today? Do you look back and say, actually, we were rich?
Well, I mean, the simple thing of you go to the market and they try, you buy something quote unquote organic, and it is four times the average price of what you get in the
That's true.
supermarket. And when you look at it, also, it's not really organic. And then here I was when growing up, I would ask my mom for a snack, and she'd be like, "Go pick an orange in the bag. Go grab a guava off the tree." Like I literally had this in my background.
Yeah, that's right.
But I didn't see it, right? As that you want the 25 cents back then, like for you to buy a soda or to buy some cookies, right? Because
Hmm.
I think it's the human conundrum of wanting what you don't have.
Hmm.
But I had access to those things. I ate organic for most of my life because my parents are farmers,
Nice.
right? What we plant, we ate. My parents tended to the land. So again, going back to understanding what true wealth is, and it's not just the currency of that exchange of money, but true wealth is so many things: your physical wealth, your cultural wealth, natural wealth, the sunlight, the fact that I was born in a country where I ate organic for most of my life
Hmm.
is actually quite amazing when you really think about it.
That is such a beautiful example because if you think about it, right now I'm in New York, and if you think about the people here and what they're spending money on their vacations, what is it, right? It's let me go to the sun. Let me be surrounded
Yes.
by beautiful forests and jungles. Let me hear the birds. Let me eat organic, right? So that's
Yes.
exactly right. As riches is not, just the currency of the country.
Yes, it is. And then also it's also the cultural currency because even when I moved here to Canada, at 25, and I've been in Toronto now for about like, 21, 22 years.
Hmm.
My cultural identity was how I found strength and I found psychological safety. When the world told me I was black, and with that blackness came the imposed identity of the colonial narrative. If I had to go by that stereotype definition of I'm a loud black woman or I am too much or all those different narratives that doesn't really touch in terms of the true essence and the beauty and power and brilliance of a black woman, I probably would not have held my head up. I probably would not have dreamt big. I probably would question every single part of my path and my journey. And you know how the brain works, right? Because that's what I love also about our connection. We can talk about all the things, including our fascination with neuroscience and the science of human behavior, where that when you focus on something, it grows. So imagine if we keep walking through the world looking for reasons as to why we don't belong, we're going to find it,
Hmm.
right? We will attract that narrative and we will keep reaffirming our own human bias. So for me, when I started understanding the true wealth in terms of my cultural identity and my cultural inheritance, it's almost like I had to surround myself with it because I wanted to be connected with it because I didn't really see it on a consistent basis, especially from the stories. Like you said, you go to conferences, you look at the media, very rare do you see yourself represented in terms of your cultural narratives or your story. It's usually coming from the Eurocentric point of view. So for me, that redesign on my website, I had to go back into that cultural wealth. And I wanted to really not just show that I'm from St. Lucia, but I also wanted to tap into the collaborative wealth with other cultural creatives from St. Lucia. So some of the photos that you're seeing, I think his name is Jesse James. I remember, no, not Jesse. Wave Productions, one of the photographers at Wave Productions. I purchased some photographs from him because just the way he captured St. Lucia, it made me fall in love with my country again.
That's neat.
Sean Michael is another brilliant creator from St. Lucia. Oh my gosh. When I saw his videos and his photos, I was like, where is that? And he's like, this is, and I'm like, no way.
Yeah.
It just reintroduced, like, I fell in love with St. Lucia over and over again. And I wanted to stay connected to that love, especially in the times when, sometimes it's hard for you to tap into that positive mindset, or sometimes you're so deep in the work, or you're deep into that rebirthing or unbirthing, or and remembering of whatever it is that doesn't really align with your dreams or your purpose, that you forget who you are. So for me, the success system, if you go to that brand, the website, you will see how the elements of life and creation, of fire, water, nature, mineral, which we all have. What I love about the elements is that there's a universal connectedness, right? But our cultural identities, right, actually brings in those unique perspectives. So for me, I wanted to bring in that unique perspective that actually informed not just my creative practice, but also my creative process.
I see how that's reflected now, but when you came to Canada, you said at 25,
Yeah.
and then you go into corporate Canada. I was gonna say corporate America, but I'm like, that's I guess a version. But
Continued.
I would
Yeah.
I would say like the corporate world is probably one of the places that the colonial instruments are still strongest, you know? And what was that like for you? Because now you're just coming to a country where you say, I realized I was black because I'm coming from somewhere where everybody looks like me for the most part. And then you come here and you go straight to corporate Canada. What is that juxtaposition like?
Oh my gosh. It was like the right term, and I so love and admire the work of Black women. I discovered the work of Dr. Kim McClear. She's a systems engineer. Her work on psychological safety inspired, my practice around psych safety as well. And I remember having a conversation with her, and I asked her. I said, what are some of the right words or language? Is it right? Because I was struggling with it because I felt these psychological violence, but I wasn't sure. I'm like, can I call it violence? But also, that's how I felt, because I felt like violence felt a bit harsh or rough. But she reminded me, she was like, no, 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 I would call it cycle, because it is. It is psychologically violent to enter a system that consistently reflects a narrative of who you are not, right? And you're constantly having to reaffirm yourself or reminding yourself. It's kind of like that, working twice as hard.
Mm-hmm.
And even when I did my psych safety certification, I did two different certifications, and both of them failed me. And they failed every person of color who took that certification, right? Because we know the education system itself is another huge, talk about the corporate. I think the largest one is the education system, because they
Absolutely.
fail
Instruments of
everybody who goes through
sure.
it, everybody, right? Because they keep teaching us from a colonial narrative, from a Eurocentric point of view. And they don't bring in the point of view of those with the lived expertise, those who have also studied and researched, those who have actually inserted universal truths and narratives. And for me, that psychological violence, what it led to was me just finding pockets of safety, right? That's how I started. I started an employees network. That's also how Sister Talk started, because I also realized that Bay Street I mean, I've been gone for 8 years now, transactional. A lot of people operated on this, hi, here's my card. I am senior this, or I am director that. And there wasn't really a connection
Mm-hmm.
to the heart. It was more of a connection to the title. But even within the title, most people didn't know who they are. So it's like, who am I really connecting with? So it felt like this really, like it wasn't a, how would I call it? It's, when you have an empty connection, what do you call this? What is
Void.
this? Like it's, yeah, like there's a void. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yes, I know this person and they're the head of this, but I'm like, I don't really know that person. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you don't feel that like deep connection. And I imagine that was more of a template, of more of a respected version of currency in St. Lucia.
Absolutely,
a
because
connection?
one of the big cultural wells of being born in the Caribbean or being born in St. Lucia is that we see each other. We celebrate each other.
Mhm.
But at the same time, we roast each other just as bad. Don't get me wrong, right? But
Yeah,
we see each other. Like, I'll give you an
but on a
example.
platform of safe connection,
Right? It's
right?
exactly. It's
You
that
don't
form
just
of
come
safety.
out
And
with
even
it. Yeah.
ourselves, we are also learning. And that's why, one of the positive aspects, I would say, of social media, we see more and more folks speaking up, right? Like, I see so many millennial Caribbean nationals talking about, listen, Caribbean people, we need to stop this. It is not a great thing for us to say, hey, girl, you get fat, or you get, like we use
I
a
see. I
lot of
see.
those kind of narratives. Like, even when I cut my hair and I went all short, I remember, there's certain family members were like, oh my, you look like a boy now. Where's your hair? Nobody's gonna date you. Nobody's gonna marry you. I'm like, why? Because I have short hair? Then they're not secure in who they are anyways. I wouldn't want to marry them. Like, why would you assume I'd want to marry an insecure person who don't know who they are? But back to the I remember when I move, and I call it in some way, it feels like cultural anorexia, because when I moved here, a huge part of our culture is greeting each other, seeing each other.
Mm.
And I'd walk in an elevator which is packed, and I'd be like, good morning, Bailey. Nobody answered.
And would this be one of the examples where it felt like violence?
Yes, because I'm like, I know you heard me. It's a small
Yeah,
elevator.
it's like, hello, a
Hello,
human just
right?
spoke to you.
And I remember there were times I used to say it again. But then you take on the shame of people who are so disconnected from themselves, because the power of emotional contagion, right? We pick up other people's energy.
That's right. Yeah.
And I think at some point I just stopped saying it because nobody responded. So I'll never forget. I went home, I was home, and I was walking, down the street. And the beauty about the Caribbean is that every little corner there's a little shop selling local food and drinks and whatnot. And I was walking by a little, we call it, like a little shop, a little cabaret. I was walking by, and I think I was still in my Canadian mindset.
Hmm.
And I walked straight, and I just heard somebody, when I passed the shop, I just heard somebody said, well, good morning. And I was like, oh my
Okay.
gosh, right. I was like, I am so sorry. I'm like, good morning. Like, and it took me back to, oh my God, this is why I love my people.
Mhm.
This is the heart connection we're missing in corporate spaces. And it's not to say it's not there, it's
Mhm.
there because there are other people who value and who practice this connection. But the overall culture, I would say the dominant culture, the culture of homogeneity, um, it's devoid of soul, right? And this is why they
You
don't
know
want us
what?
to connect.
Yeah.
This is why color is frowned upon. This is why any form of expression you get penalized.
Mhm.
And I could go on and on and on.
So is this what finally made you decide to leave, or was there other motive? Like, what was in the mind when you were finally like, all right, time to make the leap out?
No, it was a thousand paper cuts from especially my department where I worked before I left was in international banking, and my background has always been in process, people, skill optimization. And I remember and I worked in international banking, so my department were responsible for Central and Latin America and the Caribbean. So
Mhm.
that one thing I loved about my job, I was still very much connected to the Caribbean. And at that time, the bank I worked at, we had like banks in like 21 Caribbean countries.
Mhm.
And my department were responsible to optimizing because we did paper-based banking on the collection side. And my team was responding. I remember that day that VP, he told me, he's like, how can we get us off paper banking and take us on an automated system? And I'm the kind of person, oh, I love a challenge. I'm like, live it with me. And long story short, not only did I design a system, I worked in technology for, I would say, probably about 15, 16, most of my career.
Mhm.
Technology and operations, so people, processes, and systems. Not only did I design the system, I used to bribe some of my techie friends to teach me the parts of the SaaS that I didn't fully understand, buy
Yeah.
them lunch, buy them lunch, take classes online. I wrote a business case to hire a programmer. I Also launched it, designed a training program, wrote the training manual, trained all the various groups and folks, and we launched that system. And I remember when it was time for a promotion. And I used to also train all the heads of our collection departments as well. I used to plan our conferences. Like my role was multifaceted, which worked actually for my ADHD brain because it really, I was able to satisfy all those different parts of my interests. But I kept on getting overlooked for promotions, and they would bring in very mediocre white men to be the head. And I think that the biggest one for me, I'll never forget when they brought in a director who was he wanted me to he's like, this would look so great on your resume if you did X, Y, and Z, and all the things that I just mentioned to you. These were things I did already way before he came, because we had a very small department. And then we got expanded, we got an SVP, like we had more people, we got more resources, we hired more staff. It wasn't just me and my boss, who was based in Trinidad at the time. And I was always the rep at the senior vice president's table because he lived in Trinidad. So I was the most senior person in the head office. So I was always like that liaison at the table with all the senior execs. So when he told me like, oh, it'll look good on your resume, and I was just like, are you really trying to sell me back my work? I know what I do. I know who I am. That's when I realized the mediocre. And there were some other examples as well. And then I realized that they really didn't value me or my skills. So I started planning my exit. And what really inspired me as well, again, was the people. Because as much as we trained folks on the new system, folks kept on going back to the paper-based version of their work. And I couldn't understand why. And that's what got me interested in transformation, understanding that you need self-leadership in order for you to transform systems and teams. It's a cycle.
Yeah.
And John Carter, one of my favorite transformation
Yeah.
professors,
Change
you like John
leadership.
Carter too, right?
Very familiar.
Ah, so good. He had a quote that really just blew my mind, where he said that transformation is a process, it's not an event. And I was like, ah. And then I learned that, what really keeps us stuck, like, is emotions. Our emotions drive our behavior. Ah, really? How do I serve my people better, my teams, the people I am so fortunate to lead? So then I got certified in emotional intelligence. So a lot of the certifications or areas of interest was, I went on this rabbit hole of really trying to understand and be better. And that's what led me to the mission. That's why when you ask, what's your role? I'm like you said, there's so many. It could be
Million
EP
roles.
coach, it could be neuro coach. Like there were quite a few, but all of that is really, when I look at where I'm at today, especially with us about to launch COFA AI, the public version of it, has really, really helped shape and really brought us to where we are today.
What's COFA AI?
So COFA AI is an AI-powered, human-supported mentorship and coaching platform rooted in the science of human behavior, emotional intelligence, ancient knowledge systems, and so forth. And a lot of the frameworks and programs that we've designed in-house, a lot of my intellectual property is all in the back. So we're really just looking at, how do you become a better human? How do you develop yourself from an emotional intelligence perspective? How do you understand that purpose is not something you chase, but purpose is something that was assigned to you from birth? And if you understand that from a cultural intelligence perspective, then we stop trying to be human and we just allow ourselves to be.
Interesting. Well, that is a whole area. I think that could be its own podcast, actually, is the AI sides of our lives.
Yeah.
When I love the idea of using this website as a prompt for some of our conversations, because I know that you are also very thoughtful. And when you think about the expression of yourself, it's not just a website. There's other things that go into it. And one of the things that you talk about and have talked a lot about is imposter experience and elephant stories.
Yes.
And hearing your experience in the world of corporate, I can see why others made you feel like an imposter. But then it sounds like you found out along the way that it wasn't all internal.
No.
So
And
like
actually, I actually
these
reframe it.
days, yeah, like these days, what is the experience, or what have you learned about the imposter experience?
I've learned that the imposter experience, so words matter, right? Words drive narrative, it drives the energy behind action. So I'm very careful in terms of the words I use to describe myself and my existence and my purpose. So I've actually reframed. I don't even use the word imposter syndrome. I call it it's systemic syndrome or
Mm-hmm.
systemically influenced syndrome. Because if you think about the human being, we are wired to contribute. We're wired to contribute in a way that matters. We are wired for connection. We're wired to know that we matter. That's very natural for us to want to know that we matter. And when you look at the culture we inherited, especially in the workplace, there's an overrepresentation of whiteness, right? In terms of the culture. When I say whiteness, we're talking about the social construct of whiteness
Mm-hmm.
influenced by the caste system. And the very representation of that, it sends a message, right? And anybody who says that it doesn't, it means that you're not connected to your own humanity, right? Because you're actively contributing to your own moral decay for you to say that, well, you know, I don't see it or it doesn't matter, because it does. And for me, saying when you also look at the origin, so always going back to when we think about inherited narratives, just as I mentioned about the imposed identity of Blackness, what did we inherit in terms of imposter syndrome? When you think about the research around imposter syndrome,
Mm-hmm.
it was created by two white women who also did not even include, they include high functioning, high performing women. They didn't even include low function or mid functioning white women. So even there, they excluded other women who look like them. But for years, we have just taken this and regurgitated it
Mm-hmm.
and using it for everything, consistently baking in exclusion as a cultural practice. So it's going back to, when you look at inclusive leadership or you look at mindful leadership, that's what it's all about. Like, let's be very curious about the words that we use. Let's be curious about how we use them. Let's be curious about the way that we give ourselves and each other permission to expand the narratives. Because when we do so, we invite more perspective taking as a skill set. And we also invite more cultural narratives that may not always look like ours. So for me, reframing that is one way that we take that power back,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because we're saying that, wait, why would I use narratives that has excluded me? Like I'm actively participating in
Right.
my own personal gaslighting.
And imposter syndrome's like I'm suffering from something when in fact there's an environment that has made you feel this way, is what you're saying.
Exactly. There's an
And
environment, and also self doubt is natural. If you think about the brain, anytime we move away from something we don't know, right? The brain does not like discomfort. It's wired for comfort. The brain is not designed to make us happy, right?
mm-hmm.
It's really just looking for opportunities to stay in its safety zone. So anytime we step away from that safety zone, of course it will send you signals and it will say, "What are you doing, Bailey? Oh, Carlin, stop! Don't go here." Or, "Are you sure you belong in this room? Are you sure?" Like, so you treat those questions more as, "Oh, it's just my inner critic." Right? Doing what it's supposed to do because I have a healthy working brain and my brain can recognize that I am in a new situation.
Mm-hmm.
It's not telling me I don't belong, right? It's just telling me that I'm in a new situation. But again, because we're wired for safety, what we tend to do is that we rush for an explanation so that we can lower our zones of discomfort. But who said that discomfort is bad? And that's the problem right now. I have a lot of anti-DEI, right? Because we are so uncomfortable with discomfort. We're like, oh, let's just stop it. Let's just stop talking about it,
Wait, say that
right?
again. That's the problem with what?
With the whole anti-DEI movement,
Oh, right. Okay, I
right?
thought you said NBTI at first, but then I was like, no, anti DEI. Yeah, there's
Yeah, yeah, yeah. With the anti-DEI, right, movement,
Mhm.
and with the anti-DEI movement, going back to us understanding who we are and understanding that this movement isn't about us at all, right? Anyone who actively participates in the oppression of others, you're contributing to your moral decay, not mine. Yes, there will be psychological violence, absolutely, because we are human beings and we see the impact of that, of the expression
Mm.
of that narrative, but also that practice. So even just for myself, I had to sit and ask myself with my research around psychological safety, going back to what Dr. Kim McLear, when I asked him, like, will we just have to accept that it's just going to be a lifetime of psychological violence?
Mhm.
And when she said yes, in some way it freed me.
Mm.
Obviously, I grieved, I mourned. There's a lot of sadness. And at the same time, it empowered me. Because as the late Dr. Maya Angelou says, when we know better, we do better. So if I know better, why would I use frameworks or narratives that don't reflect my full humanity? So ancestral knowledge systems, if our ancestors went through this already, they've given us such brilliant work. And some of them wrote or shared advice and inspiration and created frameworks and systems in times where it was illegal to do so,
Mm.
right? Because the very first instrument used was, well, make sure they don't know how to read and write. Don't educate them. And I can't even read some of the stories, Bailey, because it's so violent.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the stories, some of the narratives. I just saw a story about a young kid from the Caribbean. One of the slave owners, who happened to be a woman, white woman, caught him reading,
Mm-hmm.
and the way she punished him, I can't even repeat it. And similar for me, like when people of African descent say that we can't trace our roots past 100 years, it's very real. But also there's a cost to that tracing of our roots. Even for myself, like with my parents, my grandparents on my dad's side, we have like three different last names. There's
Mm-hmm.
Percil, there's Evans, and there's why is the other one escaping me right now? But I remember asking my dad, I'm like, but I know, I mean, grandma and grandpa, they were married, all the kids are with each other, like there was no other person. Why do we have different names? And he didn't really have an answer. And to be honest, I didn't really start looking into my identities until much later. So unfortunately, my grandparents have passed. But through Know Your Caribbean, Fiona Compton, she's doing incredible work on that side. I got a hold of some of the slave records, and I was trying to go back and see, okay, when did my grandmother get here? Like, what was the through the transatlantic slave trade? But what was her passage? At least I can get a glimpse of her name.
Mm.
But some of the records kept by the colonial people broke my heart. I couldn't do it. I still haven't gone back. When I saw what they did to kids, what they did to women, and that's the thing, they documented the violence, but yet they said we are violent people.
Mm-hmm.
So it creates a bit of a cognitive dissonance, right? And I think that's why for me, when I now tap into, because our ancestors lived this, and if we understand epigenetics, we know we carry this trauma, but also we
Right.
carry the wisdom and the healing and the cultural joy as well. So the over focus of just the violence is so harmful to us as well. So that is why I also focus on, okay, so what are some of the cultural practices, the frameworks? How do we get to that psychological safety and well-being and cultural wealth? It can't be in the same frameworks
Mm.
that are created through the lens of whiteness. It can't, because
There's
that means I
something,
will in some way, right?
so good here because with epigenetics, we know that trauma can pass down and all of this stuff can pass down from generations. But what it sounds like you're investigating even more, like just an ongoing thing of life, is but our ancestors also dealt with that violence in certain ways. And can we learn from that too? Right?
Exactly.
And bringing that into the present.
Yeah,
You even putting this into words for people is definitely one of the learning strategies that helps them go into their life and be like, wait, am I broken for experiencing this, or wait a sec, are there these other things that are happening, whether it's environmental or whether it's just a normal experience of a brain that I can now almost like name to tame, like I can name it so that I can get past it. And one of
exactly.
the things that I've seen you talk more about recently, which is maybe one of those things from the brain, is the elephant stories. And I just had to ask you, where did that come from? What are they? Let's start there, actually. Yeah. How about that?
Well, elephant stories is likened to the elephant in the room idiom, where that thing that we know it's there is kind of like the skeleton in the closet. We know it's
Mm,
there, we see it, but no one talks about it. And when I did my adult training and professional development certification, we had the choice of either creating a framework or creating, a program, like writing your own program as part of your graduation. And I decided to write a program because one of the things I focused on at that time was around vulnerability and our ability or sometimes inability to be vulnerable, because being vulnerable, it's not just from the fear in terms of what Brené Brown talks about, but it goes beyond that. Again, that intersectional lens. It also goes beyond, am I vulnerable enough to even look at my history fully and understand and integrate? And when I wrote my thesis, I'll never forget my professor. She said, "This is the first thesis I read that made me cry," and she said, "You're going to change lives." I'll never forget that. And I'm so grateful to her because she allowed me to see my work in a whole different light. So elephant stories, as I said, liken after the idiom. But what I realized was that the stories that also shape us, whether we avoid it in our lives, we also avoid it in the workplace. We avoid it in all those different cultural systems that we spend a lot of time in: school, work, at home, even family systems. I'm pretty sure there's stuff in your family you've heard that, oh, we sweep this under the rug. We don't talk about this, but we know that this is a problem, but we don't talk about it, right?
Oh, yeah.
And right, and I realized that those elephant stories, they come from, I call it, it's called the SPEC framework. So we have an elephant story SPEC, and S stands for our societal. What did you learn about yourself, or even about your culture, or maybe about race, about identity from school, from society. P stands for perspective, your own personal history, but also history of your culture. E stands for your environment, your education, even from your emotional intelligence. What is your emotion? Because our emotions also inform a lot of our decisions and our values. And also C stands for, culture, colonialism. What did we learn about from cultures of feminism, cultures of white supremacy, so forth and so forth. And I use that framework to really help people to unpack where some of the human biases might be, because usually this bias is rooted in the thing that we avoid. And it also gives us an opportunity for us to bring our more complete selves to the table as well.
And what did you discover was your big elephant story?
Oh my gosh, I had so many. Like, where do we start?
Right?
But the E being around experiential. I think I've shared that story, a bit on Oprah's Life class, and there's a bit of a trigger warning for anyone who's watching. One of my stories, survival of child sexual abuse. I also have stories around, anti-blackness, misogyny. That also got me to question myself and my worth. And the thing about elephant stories, the narrative of that story, it tells you that you're not good enough. So it actually keeps you in this judgment zone, and it keeps you in a place where you're constantly questioning who you are, your existence. Do I belong? Who am I? So you're caught in this hamster wheel of self-questioning, but it doesn't lead you to any self-affirmation or self-efficacy. It keeps you in the unworthiness or questioning your worthiness, when really, if you exist and you're breathing and you're watching this, you are worthy. There's no question about it, right? But again, and
You
those
start
stories
from
are
a new
sometimes
paradigm.
yeah, right?
Paradigm is you are worthy. Now let's figure out what made you think anything less.
Exactly. So this is why I invite people to think about the elephant stories, because then you realize that, because again, going back to the brain ruminate on the stories, and our brains are wired for stories. That's how we make meaning of ourselves and life. So if you can identify that elephant story, or a shortened form that I call it the SIMU, right? Story I'm making up. A quick way to tap into your right, your growth brain
Yeah.
versus your past or your conditioned self, is to say, okay, Carla, what's the story making up about why you feel you don't belong? Let's challenge it. Let's test it. Let's be curious about
I
the
love
world.
it. And I love a good framework.
Right?
But that's us.
Listen,
We're nerds at the end of the day.
I love like, and ever since I discovered, when I did my neuroscience coaching certification, that's one of the biggest things that I learned, that the brain runs not just on stories but also that chunking methodology. And I'm so grateful that I was
Organization.
able to share those stories on City Line with Tracy, like elephant stories. She always, every time I remember, and she did such an incredible job. We have to give Tracy all her flowers. The conversations that she brought to daytime television into Canada, talk about addressing elephants in the room. Poof.
That's beautiful.
Like, if there was an Oscar for this here, she gets it 100 times over and over, because she shifted the narrative on daytime television. So we have master elephant storytellers as well. Even the concept of, so sometimes we think elephant stories only just shame based, but also like from a negative. But also there's an elephant stories if you think that you're not worthy of love. Like, says who, right? So it's
Love
also
it.
receiving that as well. It's also receiving that
I
as
love
well.
it, and I had to turn this into your thought experiment. So on every episode, we do a thought experiment where we can dive deeper into something that we're talking about in kind of a freer way, either open thought, sometimes it's imaginative, any direction. But when I was looking at the elephant stories and trying to understand it, I thought, I'm glad we're clear, because I thought, like, what are those narratives or those stories that we tell ourselves that kind of get in the way? That might not even be our own. And so I was thinking about common elephants that I've heard, honestly, within the last 2 weeks. I'm not even, like, common
Tell
all the
me.
time. And so I wanted to bring some of the common ones to you that I've heard recently and repeatedly. So if if you're willing, imagine that someone is coming to you with these elephants, and what might be like a top of the mind piece of advice that you would give them to at least get to the bottom of it, or a question you might ask them to get to the bottom of it, and you can choose from any part of your SPEC framework. Are you okay
Oh,
with that?
yeah, absolutely. And I
Okay.
would also say too, like even yourself, I've seen you shared some elephant stories online, right? Because it requires vulnerability, and your vulnerability, it's such a powerful tool. So again, thank you for helping others to see themselves as part of your story, because we all struggle with different things, different stories, but we often think we're alone because of that silence and that judgment. So the first thing I would tell that person is, A, what is the story you're making up? So let's get clear about it. Sometimes when we ruminate, it's just on a hamster wheel. So imagine when you write it down. When you write it down, you get clear on the root of the story as well. Because again, the power of journaling as well, right? The
Mm-hmm.
second thing that I would say is where you're carrying that story in your body. Where is that shame? And if you can identify the emotion, if you have the language for it, great.
Yeah.
If you don't, that's okay. Where is that
Okay.
shame in your body? Where is it? Is it here?
Yeah.
Is it here?
I, I see how these might be relevant. I'm going to give you four stories. I'm going to give you
Yes.
four common things that I hear
Okay.
in the last 2 weeks, even. One, the first is an actual one, and I'm too old to start over and go to school or start a business. First question that
Who's
comes to your
so
mind.
that's one. So I my question would be, whose voice and whose tone is this story being narrated to you from?
Interesting. So if someone's feeling this way, the question you should be considering is who is the voice in your head and what is their tone when they're saying that you're too old to go back to school?
Exactly. Right? Because sometimes we carry those narratives, whether it's from childhood or maybe something we did in the past where we were afraid that first time we tried something new. Usually that tone, is it your mother's voice? Is it somebody you cared about, someone you respected? So I always challenge the voice and the authority. And the other thing I would say is that, have you added yourself as an authority to the narrative?
Nice. So why do they get to be the authority and not you on this decision? Okay. That's a good
Exactly.
start, y'all. You're getting lucky you for listening. You are getting free coaching from Karlyn Percil. Better take it seriously. Okay, the
Exactly.
next
Right?
one is I was taught it's rude to outshine others.
Ooh.
I was taught this is someone that really was said in the last week
Yeah.
in a group. They said, I was taught it was rude to outshine others. Their context was that this came into the corporate world with them.
Yeah. So I would, again, going back to who told you it was rude.
Mm-hmm.
B, why are you afraid of being seen? Or in some cases, the reframe that I would offer them is the cost of being seen, right? Because
Mm,
sometimes, right, the reason why we're afraid to show up is, well, if I show up, maybe you lose friendships, maybe you lose connections, because now people see you in a different light. So you are afraid of losing those connections because we're afraid that people will say either we're too much or we think we're all that.
mm-hmm.
And we have to remember that when people share those perspectives with us, it's coming from their insecurities.
Mm-hmm.
It's coming from, because the second, so if you, Bailey, becomes this person who shines too much, it's not really about whether or not you're shining too much. It's really about, what is my place in your life? What happens to my identity now that yours has shifted? That's the fear that we're dealing with, right? But we're
You're the
also so
student,
afraid to say that.
right? Because if I'm the one answering all the questions in class, but I was taught it's rude to outshine others, what you're suggesting is that I'm feeling that if their identity shifts to I'm not as smart as Bailey for answering all the questions, what does it mean about my identity?
Yes, yes. Because now I'm questioning my place, not just in your life, now it becomes a place in my world.
Right, because maybe
right?
I'm afraid that you're going to see yourself as lower than me and maybe even punish me for that.
Absolutely. And then by losing this connection again, maybe I had some social capital and some social cred from being connected to you, right? But now that you're outshining and you're doing all of this, am I now going to be seen as lazy and not ambitious enough?
Which is
Am
them,
I?
that's a them problem, you
Oh,
come back to it.
I
Like
know. But
I
it
know
is
that's
a
where you're
lot of
going to
them
guide people.
problem.
You're definitely going to guide people there, but it's like even you saying this, it's like, so shine away because that's a them issue. They're going to have problem if anybody's shining.
But because so many of us care, and again, there's nothing wrong with caring, but don't care to the point where you're gaslighting yourself out of your potential, right?
Really good,
And the
really
one
good.
thing, the last offering I like to make around that concept is that you have to remember that when you don't shine, you are also taking away support from yourself, from the purpose that you've been assigned, right? So it's almost like you're saying that, like, let's say, like, you're running a marathon and I came and I brought water for you because you're really thirsty, but you're like, ah, no, it's okay, I'll stay thirsty. Carlin hasn't gotten water yet. I mean, okay, it's good to acknowledge Carlin hasn't gotten water yet, but make sure you're getting the water you need. And then maybe you can probably get some for Carlin later, or maybe you can ask for someone to bring some for her, but you don't deny yourself the support because someone else is uncomfortable. Look at where this has gotten us. Going back to the whole anti-DEI, people don't want to learn about the history, because if we go back and learn about our history, and maybe down the line, again, none of us created the social construct that we're unpacking right now in terms of systems of oppression and the exploitation of bodies and peoples and systems. We didn't create it, but we inherited it. What I have seen in my work is that the people who objected and who were so afraid of it, hence the anti-DEI movement, they were afraid of what will happen to their identity. I mean, I know it's not as simple as this, but if you think about it from that
Oh, it's
framework, it's
definitely
like,
fear,
oh,
for sure.
oh, so if my great
It
great
ain't love.
grandparents owned slave, what does that say about me? If I benefited from systemic privilege, does that mean I'm not a good person? No, no one said that. But again, we have to tap into the emotional intelligence of those uncomfortable, because we're wired for it. We have the capacity for it. But when you have a group of people who want to stay in the fixed mindset, they're not willing to evolve from a human consciousness perspective, then you kind of gotta have to leave them where they are. But understand that, hey, I'm meeting them here. So now you know how to operate with them. But I'm not gonna stay here with you, right?
Right.
But I'll build better boundaries. I'll build better emotional boundaries, communication boundaries, and so forth, because you have shown me that you are not willing to grow. You're willing to stay where you are, no matter how much it costs you. Because again, the moral decay you're contributing towards the most is that your own humanity, right? Of course, it's gonna,
I like this.
you're gonna see it in everywhere else, but that's the first. That's the first
I
one.
like that. I think a lot of people need to hear that, which is it feels hard on you, but ultimately their own humanity is at stake here. Okay, the last elephant story I've heard quite a lot from young people is maybe the hardest one. It's I don't have any power in shaping the future.
Ugh.
And like it's felt. I don't have that power in shaping the future.
Especially when you see the adults who hold the systemic power and position power are unwilling to learn, unwilling to meet you, unwilling to see you as a active participant, but also someone with lived expertise, someone who has something to contribute. Man, there's so much grieving around that, right? I would say like that is the first thing. And what I would offer is to look for opportunities of power in your immediate life, in your immediate circle, right? Because yes, sometimes it feels, even for myself, sometimes I'm like, man, like, oh, so now we're going backwards? Huh. Okay.
Yeah. I know what you mean.
Ah, man, this work can be exhausting. So I focus on what, if you think about it from the zones of control or circles of control, I would advise that I would offer or invite for consideration to that person. Draw up your circles of control and write all the things that are outside of your control in terms of I can directly influence it, I can directly influence what I wear, what I say, how I work, where I go to work. maybe sometimes not where you were going to work, because some right now, because of that destruction and how much the adults who had the power to create better jobs and living conditions for our youth have failed them. Sometimes they end up taking jobs that they don't necessarily want, or that actually gives them a good living wage. I would say to wherever you are, how can you make it the best based on your best? And again, your best will look different every day, right? So when you go now to that circle of power, things that you have direct influence over, list all the things.
Yeah.
As small as your thoughts, how you wake up in the morning, what you listen to, start there.
Yeah.
And I think give yourself grace to be human first. Sometimes, we want to fix, and I get it because I get in that zone sometimes. And I had to tell myself sometimes, we can't go to burnout again, Karlyn. You can't fix the world. You can't fix everything. You can't contribute to everything. So I go back to, okay, what can I control? Running my own institute, running my own business, I have a lot of creative capital and creative control. I can tap into cultural innovation. I can look again to what my ancestors did. I can learn from them. So that's something I feel like that's in a lot in my control. So as they go through this, I'm pretty sure you're going to see and find more things that's in your control. And don't forget that being an observer in your life is action. That's a lot, because being an observer sometimes takes a lot of emotional labor. Right?
I
A
love this
lot.
though, which is almost like practice your power in a way.
Yes,
Like,
exactly.
even if it is what you're wearing in this moment, it's like you are working the muscle, and trust me, you will realize that you have it.
So here's where I take a small practice my power as a Black woman who's lucky enough to be born in a Black body. I prioritize Black designers, Indigenous designers, every chance I get. That's something I have control over, because the story that I tell with my whole being, it matters to me as a expression of my personal values. So for me, that is something that when I walk in a room, I walk in the room with the dreams of other powerful Black women, powerful Indigenous women, women of color, and just women in general, right? So when you think about, again, agency from that perspective, then a lot of things, helps us. Narratives that you care about, values that you care about. Who are your other colleagues in your age group who might be working on things that need amplification, that needs a like or a boost or comment? All of those things can be ways that you can practice your power.
I love that. You mentioned, supporting not just Black women, but women in general. And there was something that you wrote that I wanted to make, I just had to add to the overthinking segment because I just wanted to break it
What?
down and think about it, which was the state of our world depends on women unleashing their full potential. And I needed to overthink this statement for your episode because I wanted to know when you wrote that, what were you thinking? Let's break it down. What state of the world, why women, what potential is not being used?
I mean, if you think about the culture we inherited, it's designed for us to keep minimizing ourselves, right? It's designed for us to stay small, play small. Unleashing our full potential looks like tap into our full agency. And the state of the world, meaning that as long as patriarchy, colonialism, or neocolonialism is at the core of our cultures, women will always be at risk. And we see it, right? We see how the state of the world, it keeps
Oh yeah.
it keeps going in a way, in a place where agency of our own bodies is under threat and harm every single day. Even the simple, I don't know if you saw that women's, I can't remember the institute who did the research, but they finally understood why women have morning sickness and some of the very life-threatening things that women go through at birth is dependent on the man's sperm.
Oh, yes. I
Like,
literally was reading that this week. How
like,
weird is it was like sometimes over 50% of, if this is the same one, of losses before 10 weeks are
yes,
actually due to men's
all of
sperm.
that,
And I'm like, they would die if they
all of
had to
that,
integrate this.
all of that, right? But I'm like, but to me, you're still telling me that you don't really value women if you're not taking this crucial information and integrating it into modern day practices. Even menopause, we stumble across menopause. I mean, forget being a Black woman, there's even less research and data. right? Like, so to me, all of those things, if we're constantly fighting for our lives,
Mm-hmm.
for full information, right? Then to me, it is the state of the world will always be, and I use the state of the world in terms of context,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then unleashing your full potential looks like going back to that, practicing your power. What can you do with what you have? Recently, I was asked to contribute to an article, and one of the questions was around, how can women be more authentic in the workplace, and authentic this and authentic, and I said, well, and that's an example of unleashing our power. And I said, I actually would like us to start by giving women the space and time to think about what authenticity means to them in this current state. Stop asking us to show up authentic at work. What does that mean?
Yeah, like you
What does that
probably
mean?
need some leadership of self first to say like what, how am I being
Yeah.
inauthentic, if at all? Like what is my authentic self
What
and
is
how is it different? Like I don't
Yeah.
know, right?
Yeah. And,
So
and is authenticity the word we want to carry with? I don't know, right? Like it goes back to this, the whole concept again around imposter syndrome, right? We inherited this whole
I
thing
know.
around, imposter authenticity, and everybody just keeps adding to it. But I'm like, hold up, what does that even mean? How about we take a step back?
Mm-hmm.
When we look at hybrid working the stats, I think I saw recently, was it the Gallup study, or one of the studies talks about how much more working moms in terms of labor, emotional labor, physical labor, they work more, right? Because again, just naturally kids, they carry a lot of the planning, everything to do in the household. But that's not a surprise. We know that. We've been
Doesn't
knowing
turn
this for
off, no
years.
breaks.
Why haven't this been integrated into wellness programs, benefits, right? It's so you have to unleash your full potential in the sense that where can I take up more space in my life? Knowing that what I know that if I spend 40 hours a week, I will have to trade something off. There's some sort of emotional labor, there's some sort of psychological violence, there's some sort of emotional tax, right? Whether it's coming from the gender lens, religion lens, race lens, etc., etc. Like even the whole concept of race, right, and race as a system, it was designed by this German scientist, but it has now informed like we're grappling with problems men created.
And then, you know, I feel like this could be
And
we
this
should
is not,
write.
and let me be clear, this is not a bashing. I'm not saying that, it's we're not blaming men, because actually men suffer just as much in the system, right? Because they don't have the
You
emotional
have me for
freedom.
sure. We are aligned completely on this. I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, and everyone listening, men are the other side of this feminist conversation. We actually need them to be involved or nothing changes,
Yes.
right? Like, so
Yes.
I see what you're saying though completely, and it. But if we were to write like one of the things I've seen recently is, and I know the reasons why as I say this, that someone said to me, cynicism is having a moment. And I know why. We have studied all the reasons that make people forget their power, young people, that make people feel like they have no control over the future, and that actually make people not even want to think about the future. I'm actually in a future, a future of leadership in my doctorate right now, studying futurist
Ooh. What is
ideas
the
and
biggest thing that you're
methodologies. And
learning?
pardon,
What's the biggest thing that's standing out to you that's giving you hope?
what is that futurists not as you may see it in the media, but you and I would be futurists. The main difference being that it's not just about predicting the future to make more profit. It's about proposing better futures, different futures. And that I see right now that people are almost like scared because the present is hard. And
Yeah.
and so it's almost like I want to take this, the state of the world depends on women unleashing their full potential, and write people, whether it's narrative or essay or something, like, well, like what could this future look like? Getting people like working towards something instead of
I like that.
against what's in the present.
Yeah.
I'm playing with this idea right now.
I like that. I'm gonna ask COFA AI to write something on that. That's a great idea. I like that perspective taken,
But
and
we do
and
need to
and
talk about
and
COFA. There's a lot
yeah.
to talk about because we have an AI project brewing as well about leadership. And I just think that Hamza and I, well, Hamza, and the listeners know Hamza too. He starts off every season, but there is ancient, as you noted, historical ancient practices around leadership, around wisdom, around guiding, around self. what we might call self-leadership, leadership of others, leadership of organizations, and leadership of systems, that somebody who is not us decided that could not be a formal corporate principle, and it wasn't us. So if you, like, if in your dream, how does COFA AI change the way people work and the way people move?
I would, in my dream, what I hope as COFA AI reaches millions is that it increases digital psychological safety, meaning that the questions that you ask, because in the back we have psych safety framework, I have my emotional intelligence framework that I've redesigned. I see it as a cultural bestie, a friend, a confidant for people who might be afraid or shy to ask certain questions out loud because they're still in that understanding my identity zone. They're still trying to understand what shame looks like for them. They're still trying to understand what fear looks like for them. They feel safe enough to ask Kofa a question, and Kofa will get to know them well enough where it becomes like your coach and your mentor for life. And it helps you to understand your power. It helps you to understand your positioning in a way that you feel more culturally aligned in terms of your values, in terms of the legacy that you want to leave behind, and also the impact that you'd like to have.
Amazing. Now we are coming to the end of our episode, if you can believe, our recording. Even though I feel like we could go on.
I feel like we just started talking.
I know, I feel like we could go for days. We may as well just make this a series. Everyone would be so lucky. But I end every episode with what's called Train of Thought, which is a segment where my friends have to connect what they think is the theme of this episode to the theme of the last episode. And of course, the last person, doesn't know who's going to be next. And I actually have to admit, I didn't know who was going to be next after I recorded the last episode. So because I know what's coming up for you, I just can't, this is just a perfect connection. So first, let me ask you, what do you think is one, major idea from what we've talked about today?
Whew.
It's hard to pick one.
That we are futurists and that we are creating the future that we'd like to see. Every single person listening right now, they're also futurists because every single day gives us and them an opportunity to practice their power.
Ooh. Okay, we are all futurists because we are part of designing better futures, and everyone listening can be part of that. So the big idea that my last guest took away was, funny enough for you, it was about creating a wealthy women retreat. And this is just what they said. So, and they said specifically, like, the wealthy was about elevating. So she has moved to real estate, and it's about elevating wealth and things like getting women into these areas that traditionally women weren't allowed to be in, and then also elevating experiences like through travel and kind of combining this all. That wealthy goes beyond just, again, you didn't know that you were the next guest, but that the wealthy goes beyond just, currency, even though we recognize that in today's system, that includes things like real estate. So her big idea was wealthy women's retreat. Now, how do you, in your mind, how does this connect to you are all futurists and you have the power to be part of designing better futures? How does that connect to a wealthy women's retreat where we have a kind of more holistic view of wealth?
I would say to look at cultural wealth as a community practice. That's how I see it. I see it as if you have position power, visibility power, because of the systemic privilege that we inherited. If you are building or co-creating something with only people who look like you, then you're not a futurist. You're actually in the past. Anything that's being designed, you should have multi-ethnic, multicultural, multilinguistic. To me, that is the future. So to me, cultural wealth is the future.
Ooh, I just love it. And one of my greatest favorite things about being futurists, which we are, whether we want to call ourselves that or not, is what you just said. And it's part of the reason why you suggest possible futures is that because you act in ways that create those futures. And so for everyone listening, if you believe it's a possible future, then how you make things, like you just said, like starting companies, starting ideas? Who is it with? You literally enact that future that you think is possible. That's a great way. That's a great way to end for people. Karlyn, is there any other pieces of advice or wisdom or anything you know what, heck, even if you want to promote things that you're working on, is there any last parting words?
The last thing that I would say is to dream big. Your curiosity is your superpower. And you get to dream big every single day when you get dressed. One of the events that we held, I'm dreaming up this Dream Big with Karlyn tour where I share my frameworks, my teachings with people, especially in the Caribbean, also here in Canada as well. And one of the community events, because I have different expressions for different events, we have Sister Talk retreats in partnership with Wild Nature. It's a Black House. It's designed also by another Pisces, one of my besties, Carl and Anna. Actually, this space I'm in right now, this is art by Carl, the first container home built in Toronto. Look him up if you're looking for inspiration from an artist who cares about the world, all living things, but also humanity. I would say to dream big. And one of the things is through Threads of Heritage. That's the final thing I live. Threads of Heritage was an event where I wanted people to think about how to actively practice their power, meaning that you can be your own cultural historian. I don't know for you, but growing up in your culture, you know how things are passed down and it has cultural meaning. Think about what you wear, what you buy. Think about the power you have to tell your story simply through the embodiment of what you practice. But most importantly, think about who are you bringing into the room with you through the expression of self, right? Are you bringing someone that you'd like to amplify? Are you quoting another person who's usually not quoted? And most importantly, are you showing up for you? Are you being the own authority in your own life? I was on a panel recently, and her name is Dr. Harper, and she said something that was so brilliant. I want everyone to think about it. Is that how are you validating your own intuitive intelligence?
Yeah.
Yeah. And sign up for COFA AI, and make sure that you
Yeah,
follow
for
me
sure.
on Instagram, and hopefully you can come to one of the conversations, whether it's the retreat, whether it's Threads of Heritage, any one of the gatherings that I'll be having. Hope to see some of you there. And thank you so much, Bailey. This was so lovely, and looking forward to our next in-person date.
Well, thank you very much.